I am here with Martin Wallace, and I've come to Liverpool to interview you especially because today's podcast explores a secret world hidden in a rented flat. Now, I've been on a mission to do this episode since I first read about it, as it is exactly what I hoped the podcast would reveal. Now, Martin Wallace, you're a filmmaker and you run Nova Inc. Film and Television with Jarvis Cocker, and who's obviously the musician and broadcaster. Martin and Jarvis made journeys into the outside, exploring some of the world's most astonishing environments and their colourful creators. So it's only fitting that I'm here in Liverpool talking to Martin today about Ron's Place, which is basically on your doorstep. So Martin, hi and welcome. Thank you so much for your time. Tell us about Ron's Place.
Well, you give me the really, really difficult task of audio-only description of something that's really immersive. So that's the thing, it's visual, and a lot of times people see the photos and think, well, that looks interesting, that looks quirky. But actually, until you go there, and hopefully people will be able to go there soon, it's getting restored at the moment, until you go there, you can't actually understand it properly. Because that immersiveness is the most important thing. You don't realise that at first. You go in and you react to each painting, each sculpture. Ron's basically painted the floor, the walls, the ceilings. He's made two fantastic animal head lion and a Minotaur fireplace. In another room, he's made a sort of Roman bread oven fireplace. So you've got all these very particular, curious things. But in the end, the real thing about it is that you're just struck by the fact that he's done all of this clearly over a long period of time with his own hands. And he's done it in a way that's both obviously kind of associative to your own home and the way we personalise our own home, but he's done it in such an extreme, outlandish way that you get these two things oscillating together, the familiarity and then the strangeness of it, and that makes for a really unusual feeling that you can't really get in other places. So yeah, unfortunately you will have to have a look at some photos to properly understand it, but that's it in a nutshell really, and why it's important.
But explain what it feels like to be in there.
So when you first walk into Ron's Place, it's basically a suburban street. When Ron lived there, it was on the up. But when he first moved in the mid-80s, it was actually a lot of bed sits, and that's why he got it for next to nothing as a private renter. But he lived there and worked there for 33 years. So Ron's Place is really unusual because in the first instance, it's on a very normal street. And now it's quite a gentrified street and the houses are all getting done up and it's quite swanky. And for a while, people actually were not thrilled that Ron lived there and he had these strange stone pillars outside because he was letting the neighbourhood down. Funnily enough, most people have come round now that they've realised what he was doing inside and feel quite protective about him. So from the outside, it looks pretty normal. But as soon as then you walk into this long hallway of this double-fronted Edwardian semi, you're greeted with what is really an Egyptian tomb. That's what he's based it on. So he's used the sort of dado rails to create the kind of registers that you do get in actual tombs. So he uses hieroglyphics, he uses known scenes from particular tombs, and he's welded all that together with his own imagination so that you end up with something that on the one hand looks quite authentic, but on the other hand, at the very end of the hall when you go in, there's a huge Cleopatra figure with a massive bust that looks like a kind of Liz Taylor thing. So he's got his authentic side, but he's also got his Hollywood
playful.
And sort of it's definitely there's definitely an element of comedy in there, even though he's got a lot of these highfalutin references. So that's the hallway. It's quite yellow, it's quite tall. And then off that hallway, there are two big front rooms, one on either side. If you go to the left, you go into the Minotaur room, and the theme there is ancient Greece, and that used to be his studio. So he's painted lots of sort of I forget what the terminology is now, but when you paint in black and white so that they look like busts, like carved busts of heads of great thinkers and playwrights from the Greek world. And then he's done sort of a tobacco set of paintings across all the walls. And then in the other side, it's done like the Villa of Mysteries in Pompeii, so sort of a deep vermilion background with a lot of scenes that at first we just thought he'd painted them in a slightly ad hoc way, that they look a bit amateurish, but actually now we realise that they're all specific frescoes from particular houses that were in Herculaneum, Pompeii and Stabia. So, you know, when the volcano went off in whatever it was, for, 45 AD or what have you, and all that area was lost and then later preserved for us under the ash. Someone of Ron's age, who was 79 when he died in 2019, he was sort of in his 40s when that was all being rediscovered after the early 19th century discovery of it. So he responded to that a lot. So that's in what we call the lion room. There's a giant lion's head, which is probably the strongest piece of artistic work in there. The craft in it is amazing, really, really good. And then there's a room at the back which he called the Regency Room, and there are some portraits painted on the wall. They're big sort of life-size portraits with frames painted on them, so they've got almost like a kind of haunted house feel to them, where you expect the eyes to follow you around the room. He's painted the ceilings, he's painted the floors, and really it's just all his passions run wild. And the fact that this was a rented place as well, obviously on its discovery, that there's a real irony there, that these days people aren't allowed to put blue tack up on their own walls, but he's felt that he could do exactly what he wanted there.
Yeah. Now, where do you think he got his ideas from? Did he travel much? I mean, what did he use as his references, or was he well educated, and what was his kind of background?
He was from a working class family, but again, his era, I think he was born in 39. Yeah, he was born in 1939. So, there was a lot of class mobility back then, really, and he was born on the Wirral. So even though we're in Liverpool now, the Wirral, even though it had a lot of working class people in Birkenhead, there still were a lot of aspirations over there because it abuts Cheshire, and Ron's family was very down to earth. But Ron's older sister, who's still alive, Pat, she ended up becoming the mayor of Wirral for a time. So these were well-educated working class people who had ambitions. So Ron did well at school, but apparently he was also a real live wire. Pat thinks that if he was sort of a youngster now, he might have been diagnosed with ADHD, and he had trouble focusing in some ways. And later in life, he was diagnosed with a mental health problem. But I think a lot of his learning was self-taught, because apparently he couldn't really take too much instruction from people, because after a while they got on his nerves, they got things wrong, they contradicted themselves, and he just wouldn't have it. He studied a little bit of art as a teenager, but mostly as a young teen, he studied to learn how to be a Methodist preacher. So he went away to live in the Peak District in a college that's still there now called Cliff College, and he did 18 months as the first sort of phase of becoming a Methodist preacher, and that was his calling really initially, was to follow in what was mostly his mum's very strong Methodist faith.
He's a fascinating character, isn't he? And we'll get on a bit more to Ron, because I know you're making a film about him. But first, I just want to know, as a home, did he have like a bed and a kitchen and a bathroom? Because did those things...
Oh yeah, no, those things existed. And again, you got to remember, when he died, he was 79, and he'd lived there 33 years. So there was... This becomes a sort of curatorial issue about what you do with the house. At what point do you show it? Because by the time he died, he was living in quite a down a heel way, because he just didn't have mobility. He lived the majority of his adult life on disability allowance. He was poor. He put all of the money that he had into working on the house, and his health was failing towards the end. So when his family first went in, that Minotaur room on the left, all they could see was cardboard boxes stacked to the ceiling. They didn't know what was in there because he built like a false wall out of chicken wire and was just throwing loads of cardboard in, we think, as material for new things that he wanted to make. So he wasn't I've worked with hoarders quite a bit. He wasn't a textbook hoarder, although you could be forgiven for thinking he was, because he stored lots of things, but he had very particular reasons to store them. He wasn't clinging.
Materials that
exactly,
he was to make things, because he's obviously used, what materials has he used to make something? Is it paint, traditional paint?
I mean, as a younger man, he was doing a lot of oil paintings, and he tried to make that work as a profession. And some of his earlier paintings in particular, I think, are much stronger than his later paintings. But again, you talk about someone whose eyesight's failing and who doesn't pay enough attention to his health to get that sorted properly. So in terms of the paint around the house, that is a conservation issue because he's using what he can get his hands on, and often he's rooting around in skips in later life. He used a pram that he would gather stuff into, like a sort of 1960s big well-sprung pram, and ship his cement around and all bits of wood. And sometimes he'd make a painting. Or you asked about materials, a lot of things he made were paper mache figures, life-size paper mache figures, which are quite unsettling when you go in the house, particularly because often the torsos have been separated from their other limbs, and so you're thinking, hang on a minute, this is a bit sort of, you feel like you're going into some kind of serial killer's house or something. But the truth is he used those things as life-size models. He would make sort of tableau of these figures and then paint the figures. And his sculptures are actually stronger than his paintings. Some of even the paper mache sculptures, when you see them in their original look, as opposed to once they've been squashed and what have you behind a big tower of cardboard, they're really quite striking and impressive. And we're talking about somebody who submitted stuff to the Royal Academy Summer Show as well. There's one piece, paper mache piece. A lot of the stuff he submitted were paintings, but he submitted a paper mache piece one year. It was about 86, and it's like a head bust of Alexander the Great, and it's paper mache, but he's rendered his curly hair with loops of paper, a bit like you'd have on old school sort of Christmas decorations, which is quite different than the way he does most of his stuff. So, and it's painted in a terracotta colour that is a bit unusual in a way. So yeah, the guy was constantly playing with his materials, making good use of what he could find, and not letting the absence of what he might prefer stop him. And as I say, that presents quite some challenges to the conservation team, because
I was just going to say that it must be really difficult if
the materials are so different, so they age in different ways. He was working in an old house that had been plastered with some old lime plaster and then bits of sort of gypsum plaster. So if you do a fresco across that, the way then when the walls are drawing water from behind, they react differently. Really, so it's a nightmare, particularly for them.
Yeah, I was going to say, I love the fact that I think he really proves that if there's an artist within you, it comes out. It has to. But I was thinking about the house was, how long has it been restored? Like, how long is it taking to kind of get it to the point where visitors can? When did you purchase it, or not you personally, but you?
So, I think it was March 23 that we actually bought it at auction, and it's taken a long time because we were amazingly lucky to find somebody who gave us the money to buy the house hours before the auction closed. But I could give you a house tomorrow, but if you haven't got the money to maintain it, and then you find that there's artworks in that have got ridiculously expensive amounts of restoration in, that's the problem really, is raising the money to, and the person who gave us the money said that it's like, this isn't the end of something, this is the start of something. And she was absolutely right, because it's been difficult for the board to raise the money to properly conserve the material. And until we can do that properly, we can't allow people in, because otherwise you're just accelerating its deterioration.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been really difficult. Obviously, it got listed status by Historic England, something else we worked really hard to achieve.
That's the first time that's happened, isn't
For
it? Right.
for anything like an outsider art creation, it's the first time, and it's great that Historic England have taken the leap, and they didn't do it lightly. I might add, they came up several times. Loads of important people came up, because they didn't want to create a situation where some people will be thinking, yeah, well, my granddad's gnomes are brilliant, why aren't they getting listed? Because at first glance, you might be forgiven for thinking that, well, what's so great about these paintings, or that ceiling, or that, why are these tatty old bits of paper mache so important? But that's why it's really about that immersive experience and the cumulative thing that someone dedicated 33 years to this. And also that it's a prime example in the UK, but actually across Europe, of these large-scale outsider art environments, which are an important phenomenon, really, particularly for working class people. Because, you know, if you're some kind of aristocrat, you can build a folly, or you can do your thing, and people will always think that the work by the great and the good is worth, you know, preserving, or what have you, or and they may not have had anything to do with it other than, let's get this done. Whereas you
Giving
can
the money.
yeah, you can feel Ron's personality. That's what's fascinating or important even about these places. It's a bit like you walk into somebody's psyche. You know, it's obviously, you could say their mind, but it's not quite their mind, because it's not exactly to do with their thinking, but you can feel a person. And the other striking thing about it is, because, you know, you can feel their passions everywhere, but they're absent, and that's a really striking feeling, which is why I think it's not just about a novelty for people. It's that feeling that I've described or hinted at there. It's actually a really unique kind of feeling, and what it does is it opens people up creatively and emotionally in a way that you can't manufacture that experience in a gallery. The closest I think you come to it, and I'm an atheist, is if you go into a sort of significant place of worship and you feel that you're kind of open to something that's beyond the nuts and bolts of everyday life. It sounds like a bit of a reach to say Ron's Place is that, and I'm not saying it's exactly that, but that's just to try and get to
the essence of,
it touches you emotionally.
Yeah.
And even though you don't understand it, and because you don't understand it, you know, it makes you think of, because there's a lot of impermanence and decay and absence, and so it makes you think of loss. It makes you think of your family and your grandparents and all of those dusty old places you've been, where, you know, that awaits your things, it awaits my things, you know. So it's got something about it, Ron's Place, which I think is really important. And that's why in the sort of middle phase, when we had access to the house but we didn't own it, that's what we were trying to do, was make use of it to demonstrate to people, this isn't just a curiosity that you put in aspic and you go, look what Ron did. It's about, actually, no, this is an opportunity, this is a creative resource to stimulate new creativity, and also therapy, really, because Ron did have mental health problems and he found his creativity to be therapeutic. And I think there's some, you know, I'm not talking about kind of weird psychic energies in the walls, but there's something about the atmosphere in Ron's that carries that forward. And we had hoarders in, we had people who were in recovery from addiction in, we had people from Mind in, and we used Ron's Place and Ron's stories as a jumping off point for them to explore their own creativity, but with regard to some of the themes that come out of Ron's life and the themes of what he's created.
That's really interesting, because I did read that when it will be used, hopefully in the future, for creative art programs to promote art and mental health awareness. And really nice putting something back into the community locally, because obviously Liverpool is, you know, a very culturally significant city anyway. But just using it in a way that, like you just explained, kind of helps a lot of people for lots of different reasons.
Yeah, well, I think you can look at that another way. I was very aware of this from the word go. We've been living through a significant period of austerity where resources for people who are struggling have been diminishing.
Cut back, yeah.
So the idea of now what we're going to do is we're going to spend, 300,000 on this old guy's house and then another 200,000 to do it up. It's like, hang on a minute. Why would we, could we spend £500,000 in a better way? And I think the short answer to that hypothetical question is no, because of that potential that I've just spoken about. So that I was always really clear about that in all of the places I'd seen that were similar to Ron's place around the world. Lots of them had been lost. That's a thing that happens from time to time. Is they're great, but there is no way they can survive. They go, and that's natural. That's in a way like we're all going to go. And particularly when they're so attached to a person, it's sometimes better that way. In a way, it was their thing, they've gone. Their thing's going to go. Someone else needs to live there now. Let's move on. However, there are other instances where the kind of thing I've described has been put into place, and through a series of fortunate circumstances, a place has been able to be saved, restored, and then become some kind of hub for community and become some kind of jumping off point for important things that are otherwise difficult to achieve. So in terms of people who are struggling with mental health problems, you might throw money at it in lots of ways, but actually empowering people to heal themselves, I would argue, is the best way to do it. And I'm not saying that's the only version of Ron's place that's important, but that's certainly one of them.
An element of it, yeah. And I think he'd be really proud of that, don't you?
Sometimes I don't know what he would think. Sometimes I think he would, make the process that we've gone through, if he was somehow still here or able to shout down from wherever he is, I think he would have been a nightmare based on what I've heard from him, because he was a tricky customer. He was a charming man, he was a polite man and what have you, but he had opinions and he wouldn't be silenced about them no matter who said what. So yeah, I couldn't answer as to how thrilled he'd be. I think one thing I think he would love is the exposure that it got in the end, because he did like, even though he did it semi-secretly, he did like to be celebrated. It's just that it had to be on his terms. And so I think he would definitely have loved the fuss that was made and what have you.
But now he's got, Ron's place. Yeah. I love that it's called Ron's Place. And he did do it in secret. Obviously, it was rented. I mean, did the landlord never go round? Did anyone go round? Did anyone visit this house?
There's probably been about 15 to 20 people who saw it in Ron's lifetime. At the beginning, it was a lot more... It was eccentric in some ways, but it was a lot more mainstream in terms of what he'd done. And then as it continued, in a way, it became more unusual, I suppose, really, because when he started with the Lion Room, even though, like I say, it was eccentric, it's like some kind of Edwardian drawing room or something like that. So it's still got a kind of cultural, obvious, quite conservative reference point in some ways. Whereas once you start painting your bathroom like you're underwater in a pond that has sort of dragonflies and hammerhead sharks somehow, then you're going off on one, and it seems to become increasingly, I'm going to do what I want to do, and a bit more whimsical, really, because of that. So
so let's talk about Ron a little bit, because there's some great photos of him, and you're obviously trying to make a film about him. What was as a filmmaker, why? What was your interest?
Well, I got involved because it is on my doorstep, just to help them, because I knew that if anything was going to happen, it had to happen fast. So that was my only thing, and I basically got some photos of Jarvis and signed them, and we got, made a few bob that we could carry on paying Ron's rent, which is what we did for 3 years, paid Ron's rent and his council tax. by raising money to just keep that opportunity alive, or the hope of the opportunity alive. And then as we were raising that money, we did a few public events, and at the public events, a few people came up to me and started talking to me about Ron. And even though prior to that I was not interested in the slightest of making a film about Ron's Place or Ron or anything, suddenly I was thinking, this is a bit strange. Everyone who's coming up is telling me different things about him. Some people are saying he definitely had a mental health problem. Some people are saying he definitely didn't. Some people saying that they knew Ron when he was a Methodist minister. Some people saying that they knew Ron when he was almost like a down and out living in the YMCA. And I just was thinking, this is like a really fascinating mystery about who Ron was. So we know that he's made this amazing thing, but who was this person? And slowly but surely that began to intrigue me, and I just thought, well, I'm going to start gathering some testimonies as to who this person was and see what happened. But we're going back to 2020 now, and this was sort of March 2020, and I had one of the early doses of COVID then. So a lot of the film happened in sort of fits and starts, and basically just trying to get people to open up about him. So in terms of who he was, well, like any 79-year-old, he did do a lot of things in his life, and he always seems to be somebody who thought quite a lot of himself, that he had ambitions and he was keen to succeed. I think his sister was probably right when she suspects he had ADHD or something that might have made him a bit awkward to manage in school back then, when it was all about sort of do this, do that, or I'll throw the board duster at you. And then after he came back from his study as a Methodist minister, he seemed to have had a mental breakdown, and that seemed to be linked to the fact that he didn't immediately get the kind of posting that he wanted. And even in his time at Cliff College, he seems to have contested things that most people would have just thought, I best shut up about this because I want to progress in this career, or I'm not sure, maybe I'm not right about this. But it seems with Ron that he just couldn't do that. So after his mental breakdown, he went through a series of phases of that, really, where he would get work, then he'd seem to struggle, need to stop, get work, so he went from his Methodist sort of preaching, he did that for a little bit, then he was working in department stores, doing different jobs as a sales assistant. He was very good because he was very incredibly charming, loads of energy, never shut up, so he was good at that, until he'd end up sort of at loggerheads with the boss because they wouldn't see that his idea was brilliant. He worked in Kelvinators, which used to be a fridge factory on the Wirral, and he was a quality assurance person. So he thought it was great to point out all the inadequacies of these fridges, but the management was sick of him because he wasn't letting any fridges through. He was making them all go back because he was so precise about what needed to happen. When the men went on strike, he sided with the management who didn't want to know him. He was an unusual guy.
Full of contradictions, like you said, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some great photos of him wearing kind of different costumes and outfits, and obviously that was another expression of his imagination, but he would be someone you noticed.
Well, interestingly, I think he was always dapper, it would seem, as a younger man. He bought a sports car at one point. His parents hated it and he had to get rid of it. So there seems to be this slightly kind of flashy edge to him. And then what happened was, in his 40s, which was the 1980s, he went back to education. He went to do 3 A-levels as part of a scheme to almost like get people back to work, people of his age. So he was studying alongside younger people, and he studied art and English and drama. And one of the photographs you might have seen of him is in a green and yellow suit, where he's playing is it Aegeus from Midsummer Night's Dream. He's playing like the father of this girl who he's trying to block the marriage, but that suit was made by other students. But that seems to be the point at which, and he was a great actor, by the way. People who saw him act in that part said he was like John Gielgud or something, because he had a very well-spoken, posh Merseyside accent and loved Shakespeare and all the rest of it. So he had a great presence on stage. But it seems, I think, that experience of dressing up and enjoying dressing up, something he did a lot as a kid apparently, once his mum had died, and that's quite a big chunk in the middle where he was looking after his mum, but once his mum had died, he began to become a lot more expressive in his dress, and that's an interesting topic in itself, because sometimes people would see him dressed up as a bumblebee or something like that, or he'd go busking, not for money, just to give people song, because he had a good voice and he could play guitar. He'd go busking around town, but dressed up in some kind of outlandish costumes. But then there were other times where he would dress in costumes that had a kind of mental significance for him. So, for example, one time a woman, a neighbour who spoke to him, saw him shuffling with his legs tied up in an orange boiler suit going to town, which was about a 1.5 mile walk, and then she saw him shuffling back with his legs tied up in an orange boiler suit. She went out and said, "What's going on, Ron? Why are you doing this?" And he was protesting against the media coverage of the British Army in Guantanamo Bay, and then being complicit with waterboarding and stuff. So he basically, in his mental health difficulties at times, had very precise things in his mind that he was doing, communicating, but not. And he wouldn't go to town and make an absolute racket where people would be asking him, "What are you doing?" It would be a very private protest. He loved wordplay, and a lot of times he would go into town. He would decode messages from newspapers. So he would see a newspaper message and then write out what he thought it was all about. And because he often talked about himself being a spy, again, slightly kind of adventurous ideas about who he was and how important he was. But that gave him, for him, it would seem, a kind of reason why he had to do things in a particular way. He'd go to other neighbours and say, the code for today is the salmon are jumping, and the response is, yes, but as long as you've your umbrella, we'll be fine, or something like that. So he took all the things that we probably read as a kid in spy novels, but lived them, really.
Fascinating guy. Really, I can see your film's going to be brilliant. So, I mean, I could talk to you all day, and I have got some specific questions, so let me just make sure. So we said he lived there for 33 years, and I think he was 47 when he moved in. He obviously lived alone.
Yeah.
Yeah. He had, it says here, we've talked about have a drink. We've talked about the grade 2 listed status. Should we mention the connection to the David Parr house? Is that worth mentioning, do you think? I mean, obviously listeners know. So listeners know that in series 1, we featured the David Parr house in Cambridge, which again was quite an interesting house. I don't know if you've been.
I have, yeah.
Yeah. So David Parr obviously did a completely different thing, but put his own artistic stamp on his home. And the connection to Ron's Place is the people that saved.
That's right.
Parr house were involved.
Yeah. So the Muller Wimhurst Trust, which I know, Tamsin Wimhurst, she was the person who saved the David Parr house, because she could see it was really important, and that if she didn't act quickly, it'd be lost, because someone would understandably buy it for their house and they would do away with all this old tatty wallpaper nonsense and magnolia it to whatever they wanted, sort of thing. So yeah, that's the link between, she'd done that a few years before, and then even though we'd made a massive song and dance about Ron's Place, it'd been on news at 10 at one point. It'd been in the Guardian multiple times, the BBC, been newspapers that had syndicated all around the world. We thought we'd absolutely done everything possible so that if there was ever anybody in this country who would be interested in helping us, they must know by now. Therefore, there isn't anybody. And then it was up for online auction that was closing at 12 o'clock on March 23rd, I think. and got an email, 9 o'clock in the morning, I think I can help you. And I was quite suspicious about that. Or not suspicious, I was just a bit jaded, a bit upset about the whole thing, that by 12 o'clock it was game over. And then here was some well-meaning person who was going to tell us something that we'd already thought of and tried a million times, but they thought they knew it all. So, I was a little bit condescending as I decided to sort of speak to this person on the phone. Not condescending to Tamsin, but about the whole concept of what she might be saying. She was on a train, she was busy, she'd had The Guardian in a bag for a while, but hadn't read it, and then she decided, I'll take it on the train and I will read it. So it was like this massive coincidence that we could have ended up in a bin, but she read it on the train.
On that morning? That
morning, as she was going into a work meeting, and just decided to, first of all, she said, I can loan you the money to bid at auction. She asked me how much it would go for, and I told her how much the landlord had said he was looking for 485,000. But we'd made a listing application to Historic England as a strategic attempt to put people off. So every time the auctioneer showed people round, I showed up and spoke to all the developers and builders about the Historic England application. At that point, it wasn't really anything that would have stopped anyone doing anything, but it just planted a little seed of doubt. So on the day, Tamsin gets in touch, we have a chat for 10-15 minutes, she says, I'll lend you the money. And then we kind of got talking more and more and more. And then by the end of the call, she said, no, actually, I'll give you the money and some additional money to get you up and running. So as I'm putting the phone down, then I'm still thinking, is this some kind of, not a scam? I knew it wasn't a scam, but I thought, am I being stupid here that I'm going to buy a house on my credit card based on a conversation with somebody on a train who then we can't get hold of again? Or, like Ron, they've got mental health problems and invent things. But I trusted. I think that was the funny thing. It was just a real matter of trust. In the same way as she was trusting me on the strength of one phone call, that she was going to offer her word and stand by that to give us that amount of money. So we bid at auction, and rather than the 485,000 that the landlord had wanted when we were having face-to-face agreements about it, because we'd scared everybody else off, we got it for 325,000. So that was just, it was like a fairy tale. It was ridiculous that you go from.
Imagine how you must have felt.
Yeah, well, I was just overwhelmed, really. That was the thing. I then had to contact everybody and say, this has happened, and loads of people were watching it online, and they were phoning and saying, was that you, or was that them, or was that, so yeah, it was really.
That's a film in itself.
No, it was an unusual morning.
Amazing. Now, obviously, you have Jarvis Cocker's name and his backing, and he obviously loves Ron's Place, which does help you generate some, publicity for it. And I mean, it's exactly sort of, is he local? I mean, how did you two start the partnership of working together? Is this?
We studied filmmaking together at St. Martin's. Yeah, so that's 30 odd years ago now, 35 years ago or something. So I've known him for a long time. I do live in Liverpool. Jarvis lives in London, and so yeah, he's not local, but he's been up and he's seen it, and he came up and did a show in the Playhouse, a big theatre, where it was at the time of his book, so it kind of fitted with his book, but he gave all the proceeds to Ron's Place. I think that was the November of 22 maybe, and yeah, by the March of 23, even though we paid all this money out just to keep it afloat, it was game over. And even with someone like that on your side, it doesn't guarantee anything. I actually think, however, it's worth saying, even though it will upset as many people as it might land with, it's interesting, but I think if Ron's Place was in London, it would have been easier, because I know through the Jerry's Pompeii, another site who died, a guy called Jerry, died at the same time as Ron did, just because the fact it's in London, it was easier for them to get the big wigs of the art world to go see it. Whereas getting people up to Liverpool to see it was understandably just harder. And I've also got to say, this, we did try and get the Tate. There's a Tate in Liverpool.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah, but they weren't particularly keen. And I mean, don't get me wrong, they didn't have a magic wand. They couldn't have said, "Oh, we'll give you the money," but it's a contested area. This whole thing about what is the artistic value of something like Ron's Place, and that's why hats.
It doesn't have obvious.
Yeah. And it's dangerous if you start saying that's art or that. It makes people really question things, and that's why it's really important to thank Historic England for them taking the plunge and understanding that this has got real cultural significance, and also they did understand the forward-thinking value of it. It wasn't just about preservation of an historic item. It was about, this is something that's going to benefit the community locally, nationally, and in fact internationally. It's an unusual place, and he left a big archive behind, Ron. When I say archive, we're really talking about a humongous box of crap that I've been going through for 4 years. Everything from sort of 11-year-old school reports to bus tickets and sort of semolina receipts from last year, all in the same box, with creepy crawlies, with false teeth, you name it. It was going through that box was difficult at times. Yeah.
And so is there did he ever do drawings of what he was going to create?
Yeah.
Did he do and research and it wasn't just
he did.
Start it and finish it. He actually properly went into planning what he was going to do.
Often he'll sort of do sort of grid layouts, the basic kind of grid layout to scale stuff up. He used a library a hell of a lot. There's one funny story where he was doing a fish in his bathroom. He went to a library and he was asking this woman who worked behind the desk, where are the fish? And she was like, over there. I've been through all of those. They're no good. They're all black and white. Well, they're the only books that we've got. And then he took out of his satchel a dead salmon that he'd been using as the reference for the colours, but it had gone off to the degree that its colours had gone. So he was very particular about his research. Yeah.
That's a great story, isn't it? I mean, Liverpool, this is my first visit, and I was saying to you, I was so excited to come up to do this podcast, A, because I get to see Liverpool, and B, obviously talk to you. And I've been really impressed. I mean, I've only been here for a day or so, but I've loved walking around and the docks, and I went to see Antti Gormley's sculptures on the beach, another place where there's 120 of these men in the sand, incredible. I think Liverpool's got a lot to offer. I mean, I love art, obviously, so for me it's fantastic seeing all the different museums and art galleries. And you've said to go to Port Sunlight Village, which I'm going to do after this, which I'm really looking forward to. Just a really interesting city to come and visit, and I've really loved it, actually, and it's been an eye-opener to me. I would definitely come back.
Yeah. Well, no, it's a real shame that you can't get into Ron's at the moment, which... No, but next time you're around...
What's your favourite bit? Have you got a favourite bit?
I suppose I like the Georgian room the best because of its mystery, because I found an old camera of Ron's and developed it, because he'd shot things but he hadn't developed it, and there were some things there where he was taking photographs of his paper mache dummies, and they were the subjects of his photographs, but I could see that he'd painted a different portrait on the wall in the background, because he basically would go over things, start again, change his mind. And so the central portrait in the Georgian room is of a woman who looks like a kind of Regency period woman. But actually, I think this was Josie, the woman that Ron loved. And so, I find that room sort of, because that was his bedroom, I think that's my favourite room, even though the lion and everything's super impressive. And the ceiling in the Georgian room hasn't been finished. There's a big stick with a brush on it because he sketches it out first from the floor. In fact, some of it, I found a diary entry where he was sketching it out from bed. He was bedridden, but he had a huge sort of stick and he was painting the ceiling from bed. So that's my favourite room.
Oh, that's a lovely story. I really love that. I mean, I'm going to let you go, I promise, but let's just quickly talk about... is there anything else that we haven't mentioned which you'd like to mention? I was going to talk about the Caravan Gallery. So that's Ron's niece, Jan Williams.
Yeah, and that's another fascinating part of the story, because when Ron's sister, who's older, Pat, and his younger sister Joan first went in, and they'd never been in, because even though they were they'd see Ron all the time at family functions and stuff. He'd show up with, 2 wigs on, a leather jacket, and a Mr. Potato Head, sweatshirt and wellies. Often he wore wellies in later life. So they'd see him, but sometimes, according to them, he was a bit of a nuisance sometimes at events because he would cause a bit of trouble or what have you. And so they were close, but they didn't go into his house. So obviously they're grieving that their brothers died. They go round to that house and then they see this kind of ridiculously crammed to the rafters place that they think that they've only got a couple of weeks to get his stuff out because his rent's over and that's it. So it was really hard for them. And in fact, they gave some of Ron's books away to the local scouts, who then sold them at the fair, because that's what they were overwhelmed with, was just this idea of what are we going to do with all this stuff. But Pat's daughter, Jan, Ron's niece, she and her partner run the Caravan Gallery, and that's like an itinerant artist photographer's gallery. And Jan had studied fine art, so when she and Chris saw it, they knew that instinctively that there was something special here that had to be saved, or fought to be saved at least. And had Jan and Chris not been there at that early phase, it's really conceivable that, because there were pillars outside that Ron had built, and the landlord pulled them down because he too was just thinking, this sort of little mini media bubble will be over soon, and then I'm going to make it into luxury flats and finally get my chance to rake a few bob in rather than 350 quid a month Ron was paying. So Jan and Chris were, it was just good luck, as it were. Although actually Jan's creativity, in a way, there is a direct line back to Ron in terms of he was very creative and enjoyed teaching Jan, not so much painting techniques, but just creative thinking about how to think outside the box and act daft and, not be constrained by things. So it was really great that Jan and Chris got there in time to see it, because they live in Portsmouth. They don't live around here. So
right, okay, I didn't know that. That's great. Yeah, I mean, I can't wait for it to be open, and obviously you can't wait for it to be open, and to just be able to visit it. And I hope lots of people get the chance to do that. And long may we as humans have that vision and feel that compulsion to produce art in whatever shape or form inspires us. And like you say, people still produce things not in the traditional way, outside of the mainstream. It's very inspirational. Ron is a very inspirational person. And without prejudice, that was how he used to write a lot of letters, didn't he? And he always used to write without prejudice, is that right?
Yeah, it was an example, I think, having read through a lot of his stuff, of he was involved in a lot of litigation at times. Like, he took the care home to court over like them not treating his mum properly and stuff. But I think more than anything, it was his chance to sort of, I put it to you, kind of get into that mode of being a little bit pretentious in his speech, and because he was a good orator. So yeah, his idea of without prejudice is actually a legal term to do with, I'm saying this, but I'm not conceding anything, even though I'm saying this. So that's what it means in legal terms, that even though you might say, I agree to this, it doesn't mean that I'm saying I agree to all that. So he would use that phrase a lot. The Caravan Gallery in particular like it because, in a more sort of social sense, particularly you're talking about somebody who's neurodivergent and living in a very different way, that in this day and age, it's good, that idea that we're just going to open ourselves up to whatever we like, and we're not going to have that prejudice. So it's interesting because it's got that dual function, really. Originally, it's him being a bit pretentious, really, but actually, I mean, because he wrote it even on when he had to remove the pillars himself. He wrote a notice and pinned them to it where they were for sale for £1, but that the buyer had to remove them. So that was him playing games with the landlord, whereby they were for sale and it wasn't his responsibility, but he used the phrase without prejudice in there. So yeah, that was his little legalese attempt at showing off.
Brilliant. Well, I have to thank as well Laura Davis and Chris Teasdale, because they helped put me in touch with you. And yeah, I just...
Well, no, please check out the Ron's Place website.
Yes.
And if you've got any skills or interests or passions that you think could be brought to bear to help Ron's Place, even though the place has been, in inverted commas, saved by being purchased, it's really, really tough right now to get to that next phase. And so anybody out there who's got skills, you know, please get in touch with Ron's Place, and I'm sure they would be made up to hear from you.
And I love, and give the website address, because Martin, I think there's a lot of lovely stuff on there as well.
I'm going to say that it's ronsplace.co.uk.
Yeah, and I'll put it on the social media things as well. So we'll definitely advertise that and draw people's attention to it. And like you say, are you still crowdfunding? I mean, is there still that going on?
I've actually stepped back from the board now because it was just overwhelming me. So I don't know exactly where they're up to. I think they've stopped with the crowdfunding just because it was, even though Tamsin stepped in, it was little people who kept us going for 5 years. It was a lot of money we had to spend just to pay the rent and council tax, and that was touching, that there were so many people giving £5 here, £5 there, and they responded to, and that was great evidence of the fact that people need this little ray of hope, this feeling that you can do your own thing, and that it's not all about you've got to be official or you've got to train for years. You know, that all those little bits of donations seem to me to indicate that people were responding to what Ron did because it represented something important to them about that passion being able to win through, and that we're not all crushed and powerless.
Yeah, I love that. So are you patron still or not? Is that
No, I am a patron still, and you know that's why I'll do this, and I'm doing a talk at the Wallace Collection in London for the Grayson Perry thing about Ron's Place. So I do my bit, really.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. I have loved listening to you.
Nice to meet you.
You're fantastic. Yeah, and just a fantastic thing you've done. So thank you.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.